started in here, jumping back into things. It's been a long time since I've talked to you guys. There's been a lot going on over the last few months. Been getting moving into this new house, and there's just been a ton going on. Obviously, Thanksgiving's happened, Christmas has happened, a bunch has been happening over the last couple of months. I'm not the only one with a lot going on in life, but this is at least me trying to come to you guys. I had a lot that I wanted to say leading up to this Notre Dame game, following off of that Texas victory in the SEC championship game. I had a lot that I wanted to talk about in all of these aspects, but just have not come on and done that. Again, just been kind of busy, even though I've got a lot kind of running in my mind. And since then, obviously, the Notre Dame game has happened. You guys that are Georgia fans, you know what has happened. We've got a lot that I kind of want to talk to about this, but we're just going to talk Georgia football. Today is going to be nothing but dog talk. That's literally what the show is called, and that's literally all we're going to do. I can't tell you 100% of how it's going to go because I'm taking all of this and running right off the cuff. Normally, I would have a whole notepad sitting here with a bunch of notes of things that I really wanted to touch on or stats that I really wanted to touch on that I wanted to go through. And I may touch on some of that. For the most part, though, I just want to talk Georgia football and what this season has been, what it's meant. It's definitely been a different year, different kind of season. I mean, I still got Christmas lights hanging around. I'm fairly certain I still have a Christmas tree hanging up in the living room. And we're past that time. But, you know, that's just all kind of part of it. First of all, I want to say thank you for anybody that's listening, watching out there. Over the years that I've done this, there have been weeks where a ton of you guys listen and watch, and then there have been weeks where nobody does, and that's fine with me. I've never done this for wanting to get a lot of listeners or wanting to get a lot of viewers, anything like that. I do it strictly because I love talking about Georgia football. And I realized through this whole thing, I don't think on that camera, hopefully that one's working, but on this other camera, it never even cut into the programming. But anyways, I strictly do this because I like talking about Georgia football. I go to work, and me and my boss and even some of the people that we work with, we'll talk about football and different aspects of football and all that. So I just enjoy talking about Georgia football. That's why I started this podcast in the first place. And I've enjoyed doing it. It's been just a different year for everybody. It's been a different year for me and this and changing up the scenery around us. And it's been a different year of Georgia football. It's not been the seasons that we've been accustomed to. And Hunter and I talked about this in the off season earlier, back in the summer. Was, man, we got to enjoy where we are. We got to enjoy where we are because one, we don't know where we're going. That's the first part of it. NIL, transfer portal, everything that's there in and of itself, not even including the recruiting that's going on in high school alone. You've got 3 different recruiting processes that are happening at the same time that this NIL is, that the transfer portal is happening. All of that is happening. You're recruiting high school guys, you're recruiting your own guys, and you're recruiting guys from other places to transfer to you. There's a million things going on in college football right now. And I don't know how any college football head coach, credit a lot out to Kirby Smart right now. I don't understand and know how any college football coach in today's age could possibly withstand all that's going on in college football right now because it's ever-changing. We knew a lot was going to change and a lot was going to happen coming into this. But now kind of looking back as the season is now finally over for Georgia, I say finally. I say that in a way of not that I wished it was over, that I wished it would have happened a little quicker or anything like that. It has nothing to do with that. It's just the fact that we're at the end of what has seemed like just a crazy season. Every time we turn around and we get into a football game, it feels like, man, it just feels a little off. Something feels different this year, and this year different than a lot of others. And I think that's a lot of the reason we talked about, hey, you got to enjoy where we are, where we have won 2 of the last 4 national championships that have happened, including this one this year. Georgia's won 2 of the last 4 that will have happened. If you want me to look at it in this kind of perspective, of the 3 last national championships that have happened, Georgia's been a part of 2 of them and won 2 of them. They won't be a part of this one this year, which again we'll talk on here in just a little bit. But it's just been a different year. Every week we came into a football game, I felt confident that Georgia could win it. And then we kind of get into some games and you go, man, I really don't know what this team's identity is. And even at the end of the season, I'm not really quite sure what Georgia's identity was through the entire season. And I think that's some of the reason that we see this final outcome here in the Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame is because I still don't know that Georgia ever had truly a identity that was built in anything this season. You know, we go back a couple of years to that first national championship, and you're built in that, having that community, having those guys around you that you're locked in and tied in with. And then you fast forward and kind of the same thing. Hey, you won it that year. That doesn't mean you're guaranteed it this year. Well, you got to continue to fight. You know, we're not going to be hunted. We're going to be doing the hunting. And we kind of continue on. We get these mantras every season from Kirby, and still had one starting this season. And then we took the field, and things were completely different than they had been in the past. Now, you have to accredit a lot of this out to some of the offensive production that left Georgia. You know, we talk about every year, how much can these teams sustain when they have these guys come in that are successful in the way that these guys have been, and then they leave. Can they continue that success? And we're seeing, at least this year, it's a little tougher than what I necessarily just thought, but there's so many other aspects that are going into this game other than just the team that you have right now, because we can look at it today and see all the guys that are leaving, heading out, and all the guys we have coming in from high school as well as transfers that are already putting their name in, saying, hey, I'm going to Georgia, they look like they need me. In whatever case that might be, all of this is happening. And it's happening really fast, to the point where, again, you have that attrition of guys who leave, and you see the result that they have in the NFL as rookies. And yes, I'm talking about Brock Bowers. Yes, I'm talking about Lab McConkey. But we have to have that next man up mentality. We have to have that next guy who's going to step up and be not a Lad, not a Brock, but be themselves and make a name for themselves as well in a Georgia uniform. And that didn't happen as much this year. Mainly on offense. Defensively, you know, we had some games where it was kind of iffy, but sadly the offense took such a step back, in my opinion, at least this season, that it kind of diminished how well that the Georgia defense was still fairly well playing. I mean, there's some things that, obviously, the run game in Georgia's defense was not as good as it's been in years past. That's apparent. You can look at stats and paperwork on that and see, okay, I kind of see what you're talking about there. But offensively is probably the biggest dip in that production. And it's not that I felt like we didn't have the guys there, because even starting the season, I'm like, okay, we've got some running backs. We've got some answers that do have to be made in that time when they start getting on the field. And we started to get some of those answers, obviously, in transferring Trevor Etienne. And we've got Nate that's come in as well, and he's made a huge impact in his first true season carrying the football with Georgia, which is awesome to see. That was one thing. And then Carson Beck, you know, he had his moments where we wondered, is Carson the guy? And I think once you get late into the season, especially like this Notre Dame game, you see Gunner that comes in and you see the potential that he has, the spark that he can bring to a team. And did he do that? Yes. But you also see there is that step of, okay, he can bring the spark. He's got this where he can kind of make a defender go, okay, this guy might run the ball on me. I've got to be weary of that. He doesn't have the speed. He doesn't have all of the intangibles that a guy who has started for the last couple of years for you has. And it's not that he can't get them. It's not that they're not within him. It's that he's not to that level yet. The guy hasn't played true football in, 2 years now, I guess it's been, and until the end of this season. So he's getting, not that he hadn't been on the field, obviously competing against the guys that he's been competing in at a high level, because you have to if you're playing for the University of Georgia. But I think that there's just a step that he has to make, and I have no doubt in my mind that he's going to be QB1 next year, and that he's going to be the guy that we're all looking at going, okay, this is exactly what we expected coming into next season. Again, none of us expected to see him this season. I had a couple of games this year that I wondered, hey, if we had to rely on a backup quarterback, could we do that? Could we do that right now? I don't think you have that Jake Fromm and the Jacob Eason season where Eason goes out, Fromm comes in, and everything seems to be okay going into that season. We didn't really have that. And then obviously Stetson, after that kind of back and forth season a couple of years ago where we start off with Arkansas, we have DeJuan Mathis, we have JT Daniels, who we don't know if he's healthy or not, and Stetson comes in and you see what he became, but it wasn't that first year that he became that. And maybe that's what we get in Gunner next year. I'm not really sure. I think there's a lot that we're going to learn next year, but the biggest thing is, it's just been a strange year, because we're going to talk about this year before we kind of start looking at next year. You know, you get in these games that you felt confident Georgia could win, that Georgia should be able to handle business, and then there were times where Georgia did that, but then there were other times there, man, it seemed like every football game we played, by the half, if Georgia wasn't up by 3, we were losing. And it kind of became that point, even in this game when we're down at the half, I was like, oh, okay, well, we've been here before. I want to hear that locker room speech that Kirby's about to give, and let's see what happens following that. And generally, Georgia has come out and answered that call in the second half and rang the bell. That didn't happen. Didn't happen in this Sugar Bowl. Again, we're going to kind of dive deeper into it in a minute. But it just kind of wrapped up in realizing in this game, okay, all of that's happened all season. Every time that you've had to battle, you've had to come back, you've had to fight, you've got these wins in that way, and some losses that you've taken in that way as well, not being able to get back in that. Eventually, it's going to come back and it's going to say, hey, you can do that occasionally here and there, but today's not the day. And today wasn't the day. And that's not the excuse that you can make that, hey, some guys have it one day and some guys don't the other, because you have to bring it every day if you want to win a national championship, especially in a 12-team playoff. Yes, you might not have to bring it day one, game one, because you might lose it, or game two in Notre Dame's case. You might not win that second or third football game of the season, but then you can win out throughout. Find yourself in a really good spot playing in a semifinal college football game in that same way. And Georgia, throughout the entire season, never really had that moment that made me go, boom, there's the Georgia that we're used to seeing. Boom, that's a team that you can't beat. You had sparks of it. Sparks is what I mean by that. That Texas game, how the defense played lights out in that football game early, especially in that first half of that game. It was like, this is the Georgia we're looking forward to seeing. And I had a little spiel before that game, and that happened. We looked good, and I was like, all right, we're good to go from that point. And we never really got to that point where we were just chugging along looking like, okay, this is the Georgia of old. This is the Georgia that's going to put 50 points on you if you let them, and the defense is going to stifle you. That never really came to fruition. A lot has to do with the confidence level of a lot of guys on this team. Not necessarily saying just from a running back position, not necessarily saying just from a wide receiver position, but stats do also tell that story, and the fact that we had a lot of trouble catching the ball. I don't have to tell you guys this. Anybody that's watched Georgia football this season has seen that time and time again, every game we get into, and it's not me harping on the players, because I think the players are fine. I think right now it's just a whole in general where we're just sitting back going, man, we've dropped so much that you lose the confidence in yourself. And I think we just kind of have to get that back. And I'm hoping that that's what happens for sure in the offseason. I have no doubt that Kirby's going to get the guys ready by the time we get ready for next year. Again, that's a long ways away at this point. We're talking, 8, 9, 10 months down the road before we really get back into that point. I guess it's really not 10 months. It's 9 months, and we'll be right back in it because it's already January. But you understand kind of what I'm saying on that. We've got answers. We've got questions, I should say, that need to be answered. Most everybody kind of wants to point at Mike Bobo and say, hey, this is the answer. This is the difference. Because with the Todd Monken offense, man, you didn't have this. Well, here's the problem with looking at that. Todd Monken is not in college football at all. The dude just broke records, I'm fairly certain, as an offensive coordinator in the NFL for rushing and receiving yards for an offense. And I don't see him looking at college football, especially in the landscape that colleges turn to today. I don't see him turning and looking at that going and say, yeah, I want to take another crack at that. If he did, hey, I'd love to see him back out here. But don't see a guy doing that. I think he also understood kind of what was coming down the pipe, just like a Nick Saban who retired last year, understands what's changing in college football, what's about to happen, what's coming down the line, and took that opportunity to say, hey, I can do this in the NFL, get paid pretty handedly, and I don't have to deal with all of that, especially the travel that it takes in recruiting alone. So you don't see that guy. You got a guy in Mike Bobo who has had good offenses in the past, but it's very, very easy to point at him, especially considering the things that we've seen in the past couple of years. And then you get to this year where every single football game, it seems like we got into the game and we were just boring. Is the only way that I can put it. It just felt like, and hey, if boring is what it takes to win football games, if it takes a boring football game to win a national championship, so be it. That part I don't care. I don't care if it takes being boring to win a national championship. The problem is when you're being boring, and I mean that in a point of no creativity, very, very understandable what you're about to do offensively. Very, what's the word I'm looking for? Predictable. We know what's coming. We know what's about to happen. When you play that type of football and you're not winning a national championship and you lose in the first round of the playoffs, other teams have done that too, obviously. But when that happens, that's when I step back and go, okay, you can't continue to try to play that same kind of football and expect to be able to win a national championship if you can't do it. Because, again, we lack that creativity this year, which was something that I don't chalk up to a quarterback who's been there for a long time, who came into the season as a Heisman hopeful, obviously that doesn't come to fruition, but comes into the season in that way, everybody looks at Georgia and says that's the team to beat this year. And you come in kind of lackluster, and slowly throughout the season you start to see, okay, we don't have that same kind of high-powered offense that's going to make defenses kind of tremble when they get on the field with you. And that's tough to see as a Georgia fan. But again, like I talked about on the top of this thing, we talked about that. Enjoy where you've been, where you are, because you're not guaranteed to always have those seasons. And here, lo and behold, this first season out of this, really, because last year you're basically a game away from playing for it again. This year, you're not. You're further than that away from playing for it. And that's just enough to even say, hey, we've got to enjoy where we just were and hope that these days are not that far and few in between. Like Kirby said a couple of years ago when winning the national championship, he said, man, I hope it's not another 30 years. Luckily for him, it was like 364 before Georgia won it again. But we're going to hope for that same thing, that it's not going to take that long to kind of get back into that. And I don't think it will. I think Kirby's going to get things turned around. But you cannot mistake the fact that, hey, obviously – things are changing. Things have been changing in college football, and they continue to change. I don't understand how a coach can sustain in this, because there's just so much that you have to govern. There's so much that you have to manage that I couldn't imagine. I really couldn't imagine having to manage all the things that Kirby does, and a lot of credit out to him, especially with everything that's going on, not only in your football facility, not only in your household life between kids and obviously your spouse and everything, but then you got your family in general outside of that. Obviously, all the tragedy that struck before this Sugar Bowl was a huge kind of, I don't really even know the words to put into it, for something that happened so close to everybody who was down there waiting for this Sugar Bowl to happen, just blocks away, for the tragedy that struck. And continued prayers for all the family, friends, and everybody who was involved in that, because you didn't even have to necessarily be right there at it to be affected by that. Somebody 1,000 miles away that knew somebody that was there can be affected in the same way. So prayers out to all them, but obviously all the Georgia players, all the Notre Dame players, all the staff, family, friends that were there, that were around, it affected every one of them. And then they're told, hey, we're going to back a game up a day. You know, you go through that step, everybody's staying in the hotel, and then you get on the field and you play ball from that point on, and you try to act like nothing just happened over 24 hours ago, or under that at that point. And then you have, well, I guess it was over, but anyways, and then you have on top of that, and these are not excuses, but Kirby Smart's dad at that time falling while in New Orleans, and then he would eventually succumb to those injuries after going through hip surgery while down there, and has complications, and that loses his dad just a couple of days after this. So prayers out also to the Smart family and Kirby and all as well. And this is not me boasting or anything like that, but I know I went to the same high school that Kirby's dad went to. That's not saying anything, because a lot of people probably said, yeah, I went to the same high school Kirby did, you know. But very close as far as the family dynamic of things with Kirby and his family. They've all been very close, and I can't imagine what he's going through, not only trying to manage a college football team right now when all this is going on. You've got guys who are wanting to leave left and right, and then you lose your father. Again, couldn't imagine all of that being on top of also losing your father at the same time. So prayers out to the Smart family for all of these things as well. And that's all we can do, and that is just continue to pray. And if the guy needs something, Lord, help him. You know, if you're close up there in Athens and have some ties to it, man, help the guy out any way that you can. But it's just tough. It's tough when you go throughout a season that you just hope, and you come into the season seeing so much on the line that you say, hey, look, Georgia looks good again this year. We look to make a good run at it, and then to kind of fall short in that. It does stink, but at the same time, you know, I'm looking forward to next year immediately. I'm right off the mat, ready to get back after it next year. Trust me, if you're a Georgia fan and have been long enough, you've been through the times where, man, you didn't want to get up off a mat. When the next season started, you said, okay, the season started, so what? But we can still be excited about the seasons that are to come, and the season that will be coming again in like 9 months. We'll kick back off again. And this season comes up to an end. I mean, the senior class goes out as one of the winningest, if not the winningest, history-making SEC Georgia football team in the country. I think they go 25-0 at home. 2 national championships for some of these guys. 2 SEC championships for some of these guys. A lot of seniors obviously headed out. Some underclassmen that will also declare for the draft. And then you got guys who are just going to transfer out as well. And then you'll get these guys that come in. But credit out to all of the guys who have played for us this season, and obviously seasons past that'll be graduating, headed on. Man, we can't thank you guys enough for everything that you've brought to this team. And again, the winning ways that you have become accustomed to. We hope that you guys get to continue that in your day-to-day lives, whatever it is that you got to do from this point forward, whether it's the NFL or just going to work, that you get to remember and say, hey, I was a dog in those times and I got to win those championships, and how exciting and fun that was. And we're looking forward to the day that we kind of get back to that, which I don't doubt that that's going to be short-lived before we get back into those winning ways like that. Again, it's not a bad year. It's not a bad year when you end the season, 11-3. You're 11-2 coming into it, losing 2 regular season games, winning an SEC championship game, which means a lot to Kirby. Obviously, it's very, very tough to win the SEC, even more so now that you get 16 teams in there and the top 2 have to fight it out. You don't have the East and West. Who knows what's going to change with that in the years to come if they go to these pod systems, if they go to a 9-game SEC schedule. I don't know, because one thing's for sure is the SEC absolutely obliterated itself this season. One SEC team beat another, which kept another out. And then we see, once we get into bowl season, again, I know you kind of got to take bowl season with a grain of salt because it doesn't really mean a lot when these guys are leaving, not playing, what have you. But there's been a lot of SEC teams that they've played. The guys have played the game and didn't turn out very good for the SEC this year. They kind of just ate each other alive. Some of these teams that were hoping to get in, vying for that position to get in there at the 12-team playoff, didn't quite get in, and then they didn't handle business in the bowl game either. A couple of them did, but didn't handle business in the bowl game either. And then, you kind of sit back and go, all right, maybe it's just a tough year all around for the SEC, the way that things have kind of worked out. But again, I have no doubt that that's going to turn right back around next season once we jump back into it. But this Sugar Bowl, kind of touching on this real quick, and we'll jump out of here for a little while. I'm sure in some point coming up, Hunter and I will sit down and talk about some Georgia football and reminisce on what this season was. Not quite what we wanted it to be, winning a national championship, but again, you get to hang your hat on the fact that you won an SEC championship game in year one of being in that 12-team playoff, but also being in that 16-team conference that is the SEC as well, and saying, hey, I'm better than all 16 of those teams that played in it, regardless of what some of the head coaches think, but they weren't in that game to play it. Just like Georgia wasn't in this or national championship game or the playoffs last year, you got to win the game to get there, and if you don't get to play for it. So in that same way with these guys in the SEC, that's the way that it lined up. Some teams had easier schedules. Some teams in Georgia had much tougher schedules to be able to get there, and nonetheless, they still got there, and they won that thing, and they won the SEC. So a lot to hang your hat on there. Then we get to the Sugar Bowl, a lot kind of coming into it. Obviously, Carson Beck goes down. He's not going to be playing. You lose a running back in practice as well. He's not going to be playing, so that just kind of limits the depth. Even though he wasn't the first-string running back that was coming in, Roderick, he was still, a vital part of this team and a running back depth that you definitely need to have when you've had a couple of other guys who have been beat up in that running back room as well. So, you knew coming into it that you got injuries, you're beat up a little bit, but you got that extra time to kind of prepare, especially in a quarterback for Gunnar Stockton, who is going to need that time to really start to learn the offense and kind of get up to par, so to speak, to get ready to roll with this offense and run the offense. And I think Kirby had even said, hey, one of the big differences in Gunnar and Carson is obviously Gunnar is capable in all of these ways, but he's not quite that line of scrimmage manager where you have a Carson who comes up and kind of talks to his O-line, kind of changes some things up, reads the defense, get those audibles in. Gunnar's not quite on that par yet, but again, he's going to get there. I have no doubt that we're going to develop him and get him to that point. We've just got to get there. Hey, the dude's played like 2 football games in 2 years, so can't harp on him too much. He did everything he could. I mean, you can't help that in this football game, you got a guy in left tackle who's getting beat, and this was a tough day for the offensive line in a lot of ways. Not just him. A couple of guys were kind of getting beat toughly. Again, got to give some credit out to Notre Dame here for that defensive line and the effort that they put forward as well coming into this game. So credit out to them on that, but making mistakes. A lot of this was defense. Hey, they did their job, and you look and you say, hey, it was 23-10. They gave up 23 points. Not a lot of points, first of all, to give up 23 when you really think about things on a team that all it takes is 24 to beat them. But one of the things I was looking at is I think they scored like 17 points in under 54 seconds or right at 54 seconds. It might have been 57, I can't remember, but under a minute basically in the time that it took for them to kick a field goal, us to fumble it, them get the ball, one pass, touchdown, and then run the kickoff back after the half. That's 17 points right there. is all it took for them to really gap, because at one point it's 6-3. We get the ball back. I'm kind of surprised we didn't take a knee, and that was kind of one of those moments, in other times where, there's a minute and a half left, and I'm like, why are we not running plays? Why aren't we kneeling the ball right now going into the half? And this was one of those under a minute that I looked and I was like, why are we not kneeling the ball? Because normally, we'd want to come out firing, hey, let's see what we can get going. But in this situation, again, you can always say one thing or the other when it comes out of the game to say, hey, I wish we'd have done this. But even in that moment, I'm thinking, all right, it's under a minute. We're pretty deep in our own territory. It's 6-3. This is a very manageable football game. We've done well offensively as far as drives. We drive down the field. Obviously have a crazy sideline penalty that we're not going to harp on at all. Crazy sideline penalty only gets you a field goal. Then we drive again, obviously, and we fumble it deep in their territory, which, again, could have been a scoring drive. It doesn't happen. So it's not like offensively we hadn't been really moving the ball. We had definitely been eating the clock, which I realized, all right, this is what Georgia's going to do in this game. Limit the possessions of Notre Dame, get down the field, score, get the points where you can. And that happened early, but we weren't really getting the points off of them. And then obviously you don't take that kneel right there at the half. Before it, you make the mistake, and then they capitalize on it immediately. And at that point, go up, 12 or 13 to 3? Well, 6, yeah, so 13 to 3. And we're kind of sitting back going, man, that was fast. All right, well, let's take a breather. Let's take the knee. Let's get to the half, and let's get out of here. And then we come back from the half. They get the ball first, but it's like, all right, defensively, we're still looking good. And they immediately run a kickoff back, and all of a sudden you go from 6-3 right there at a minute to go before the half to all of a sudden it's 20-3 very, very quickly. Very quickly. And I realized this is going to be tough to come back from, because coming back from a little bit of it, 13-3 can happen. 6-3 obviously can happen. 13-3 gets a little bit tougher. But then 20-3, all of a sudden you look and you go, man, that's tough. Again, I know we did it against Alabama. I know we did that earlier in the season. But there becomes a point later in the season, especially when you're worn out as much as you are. This is going to be the 14th football game that they've played at this point. That's not the 4th game where you're a lot fresher. And you have to be able to have that ability to play even if you don't have any gas left in the tank. I understand that. But this was the point where it was like, hey, when you get down in a game like this, it's a much tougher task to overcome, especially in a Notre Dame defense who was playing really well in this game, especially in that second half. They limited a lot of what Georgia could do. There was a couple of explosive plays that should have happened and didn't really happen for Georgia. But that is kind of what it is. Again, credit out a lot to Notre Dame's defense, as well as some of the scheming that they had in this game. They played a really good football game, played to win, came to win. We made a lot of mistakes, kicked ourselves in the foot a lot of times, and just came up short in this one. 23-10, obviously the final in that Sugar Bowl. Notre Dame does win it. And Georgia's season comes to an end just like that. Again, just kind of a strange season overall. A lot of games where we wondered, hey, what exactly is our identity? One of which I still have not looked at and said, okay, this is the identity of the team. And maybe throughout the offseason I'll kind of look back and say, okay, I kind of see what it was. It's not necessarily that we had an identity of, hey, this is what this offense is going to do, or hey, this is what this defense is going to do. Maybe it's something deeper within the locker room this is what we're working on. We're working on something in the locker room. So you might not see it today, but next season when we're playing, you might see the results of what's been happening in that. I don't know. I'm not really sure. I know it's been a wild season, but hey, it's still been a good one. Again, you win an SEC championship, you go 11-3, you win 11 games. A lot of teams are not winning 11 games in a season like this, especially with the schedule that you had on tap. Another fun season is going to come up next year because we got another pretty good season, or schedule, I should say, especially I think some home games that are pretty exciting next season that we'll get to see as well. So that'll be something to kind of look forward to. I don't have a lot more on this. I wanted to kind of keep it right there at that 30-minute mark, not to run too long and just rambling about some Georgia football. Again, it's Dawg Talk. That's what we're here for, just talking to Dawg and enjoying it. And, again, I expect at some point in time I'll kind of catch up with Hunter, and he and I'll go over just what this season was and kind of get some of his opinions, his feedback, all of that good stuff. But like I said off the top as well, I really appreciate you guys being here watching, listening, whatever it is that you guys are listening or watching watching on. Again, we appreciate it. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the like button, hit that thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already. You can hit that and follow along anytime that we do put up a video. We're available pretty much anywhere that you can listen if you just want to listen on podcast format, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, all the places. You can go over there and search up Dawg Talk. You'll be able to find it as well. You can click that link in the description, whether you're listening or whether you're watching on YouTube. You can click the link in the description. I think it's a Linktree link. It'll take you to everything, all the socials, Twitter, is what I'm always going to call it, X, at Dawg Talk 20. Same thing, Instagram, Facebook, all of the things. And the last but not least thing that I do want to mention as well is the SpeakPipe link. If you got anything that you want to say about Georgia's season so far, all the season all together, you just want to rant for 15 minutes, click that SpeakPipe. Click record. You can do it from your headphones. You can do it from something like this. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be anything specific. You can put your head up to the phone like you're on the phone and do it that same way. Just say whatever you want, leave it, and I'll be sure to kind of check over those here over the next coming weeks and see if anybody's got anything to say. That'll kind of determine if I have an episode between now and the time that Hunter and I get together to kind of go over all of his opinions and thoughts on the season and the wildness that it was. But other than that, again, I appreciate you guys listening and watching. If you want to support the show, that's also in the link as well. I would appreciate that. Not going to turn that away at all. But otherwise, until I catch up with Hunter, that's going to kind of wrap it up for this season. Again, one that's just been a little different, but I'm thankful. I'm grateful, and I'm blessed to be here and have you guys a part of it as well. But I'll check in with you guys later on. Good odds.